The Georgia Bulldogs are overhyped, or maybe they're about to show the rest of college football what that hype is all about, as they kick off the season against the Clemson Tigers in Mercedes-Benz on Saturday. Now, this is a classic rivalry matchup between two teams that know each other very, very well. Georgia and Clemson have met many, many times over the decades, and all those games seem to be consequential in more than one way in any given year. And this year's no different because you have two teams that are ranked heading into the game. And of course, the Dogs are the #1 team in the land. Clemson seems to have fallen off over the last few years, not exactly what we have gotten accustomed to them being back when they won 2 national championships under Dabo Swinney. But they are still a quality program knocking at the door and eager to prove that they belong in that upper echelon of college football once again. But how did we get here? Is it because of recruiting? Is it because of mismanaged coaching hires? Is it because of just bad luck? Why exactly have the Clemson Tigers fallen off? Because it's not like they don't have talent on the roster. They have a 5-star quarterback in Cade Klubnik. Kid never lost a game in high school. Yet so far in Death Valley, he hasn't gotten the job done the way the Clemson Tiger fans are used to having it done from the quarterback position. There are other players along what traditionally is a fantastic Clemson defense, especially along the defensive line. They've still got dudes there. TJ Parker, Peter Woods, and then at linebacker, you've got an All-American at Barrett Carter. It's not like Clemson has fallen off the table, but they just don't seem to be quite what they have been. And they are looking to measure themselves against the consensus #1 team in the land, the Georgia Bulldogs, who roll into this game with this particular, maybe not as publicized opportunity ahead of them on Saturday. If Georgia beats Clemson this Saturday, it will be their 40th consecutive regular season victory. That streak, no one has gotten close to it since the 1950s era Oklahoma Sooners. And it is something that would get everybody's attention come Sunday morning. Is Georgia in position to take advantage of what could be a Clemson team that's not what they were? Well, all indications say yes. They have most people's Heisman favorite in Carson Beck coming back for year 2 at quarterback. They have depth at the running back position, a fantastic offensive line, and of course, there are going to be players, star players, and depth on the defensive side of the football. So everything seems to be coming together for Georgia to be able to take advantage and get a big win to kick off the 2024 season here against Clemson on Saturday. I think this game is really going to come down to what a lot of games come down to in college football, and that is the lines of scrimmage. When you look at Georgia's offensive line against Clemson's defensive line, you would think that Georgia has the advantage there, given that they return 4 or 5 along a veteran offensive line, many of which are All-American or All-Conference candidates. They're replacing their center with Jared Wilson, who's going to be making his first start for the Dogs this Saturday against Clemson. And that is the spot where I would say we need to look early in the game, because that defensive line for Clemson still has players. I just told you about them, TJ Parker and Peter Woods. But here's the thing that maybe you didn't know. Peter Woods has been kicked out of the interior defensive line out to play defensive end at over 300 pounds. Now, is that move happening because that's where they think they can get their best player in the best position to make the most plays? Or is Peter moving out there because he's just that good, but they don't really have anybody else that can do it? And that means they're going to be depending on young bucks along that interior defensive line against Georgia. That's a key question. When you flip it around, Clemson's offensive line wasn't the greatest last year. Yes, they're back. They have a lot of experience with over 100 combined starts between the returning players along that line. But just because you're older, does that necessarily mean that you're better? Not always. When you look at Georgia's defensive line, they weren't the most explosive last year in terms of disruption and tackles for loss, but they are a very solid, very veteran group. Georgia knows what they're getting from their defensive line. It is not the same defensive line as the 21 or the 22 national championship teams. That doesn't mean that they are not good. So even though Clemson has all sorts of experience returning for them in front of Klubnik against the Dogs, I think the advantage still goes to the Georgia defensive line. So along the lines of scrimmage, both Georgia's offensive line and Georgia's defensive line, I think the edge has to go to the Dogs. And at the end of the day, I think that's where this game is going to be decided. I think we're going to see Georgia run the football in a way that maybe we haven't seen over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of their ability to make bigger, splashier plays. I think Clemson's probably going to be able to make enough plays, especially early on, in the way they scheme it up offensively to put a little pressure on Georgia's defense, because they're still going to be finding their way a little bit, especially on the back end. I think it's going to be close in the first half. And unlike most people, I don't think Georgia's going to boat race the Tigers in Atlanta. I don't think this is going to go necessarily the way Georgia versus Oregon did a couple of years ago. I think that possibility exists, especially if Clemson turns the football over the way Klubnik was prone to do last season. If that happens, then Katie bar the door, this thing could get ugly early. But I don't think that's what we're going to see. I think it's going to be a competitive game for the first half. I think in the second half, Georgia's overall roster depth and talent is going to show itself. It's going to be revealed. And I think the Dogs get the W against the Clemson Tigers, let's say 31-17, which would give them a comfortable cover in Atlanta to kick off the 2024 season. That's it. I have Dogs over Tigers. Until next time, enjoy the games, take care of yourselves, and go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.